want to talk to you about something I'm super excited about. It is a Minecraft video, but I hope you will stay for this one because, oh boy, I think I've like literally just changed the game. It is so simple. This is a part of what I call my wish list update. That's going to be its own separate video because it is kind of large, but I wanted to focus in this video on one mob. But technically two mobs. And an item because they're all somewhat related, and I think you're really going to like this. So in 1.21, we are getting a brand new mob called the Bog. And I like this. Conceptually, I think it's a really cool idea. It's essentially a drowned version of the skeleton, I guess, although it doesn't transform in water, which makes sense. They don't have lungs. How's it going to drown? Sure. But it's not as intuitive as that because they shoot poison arrows, and poison arrows would be terrifying if they shot at the same rate as skeletons. So apparently they shoot slower. Does that mean they move slower, though? Is there any visual indicator that they're slower than skeletons? Because if there's not, I have an issue with that. I think they should be slower, too. That said, honestly, I would have replaced this with something I think is a little bit better, and it is the baby skeleton, and with it, the blowgun. Why does it have a blowgun? Well, baby skeletons would essentially inherit all of the properties of being both a baby hostile mob and a skeleton. Skeletons are evasive in their maneuvers, and of course, baby mobs tend to be faster than their parent, right? At least in terms of hostile mobs. So if you have something that's just a fast skeleton with a smaller hitbox and it's evasive, that's just a better skeleton, and skeletons are already kind of terrifying, especially if you're playing like hard mode. So how do we balance this? The blowgun. The blowgun is a weaker weapon than a bow and arrow, but it does have some benefits, including not just enchantments, of course, some of which are exclusive to it, but splash potions. This is where things get interesting. First off, before we talk about the splash potions, I'd like to say I'd like to add bamboo to the loot table for fishing in mangroves and in swamps too, just because you can find slimes in swamps. You can also find them in jungles. It's a lot rare, obviously, in jungles, but it would be nice to get both, so that they're both available in the same places, if that makes sense. That said, I could see a totally different recipe for this, but suffice to say, the reason I think this is really interesting is because if you have the blowgun in your main hand or your offhand when you are inflicted by any kind of splash potion, or if you throw the blowgun into a cauldron with a potion in it, if you're playing Bedrock, it takes on the effect of that potion for a specific duration. And thus, when you shoot something, essentially you have a flavored projectile weapon. How cool is that? Obviously, it has a different projectile in the form of, in this case, I did flint shards. I could see just regular flint and not introducing this, but I'd like to introduce flint shards and then have uses for both of these items, right? In this case, though, they're consumed upon use. They're not like arrows. You cannot retrieve them, but they're flint. Like, it's easy enough to get, right? Especially if you have fortune, especially, etc., right? So, how else do blowguns matter? Well, they don't do a lot of damage on their own, vanilla, right? But the enchantments obviously help, and of course the splash potions help. When the baby when the baby skeletons get summoned in, they're not going to have any kind of splash potion effects. Of course not. Although witches could spawn in, swamps, in witch huts. So that could be kind of terrifying. But more notably, the enchantments, they can spawn in with enchantments. Here's the thing. When I think about splash potions, witches are obviously the first thing that comes to my mind. There are obviously other ways that you could inflict this item with splash effects of different kinds, dispensers, etc. But when I think of witches specifically, I thought about this idea all the way back in like 1.17. We had just started hearing about the mangroves. We had just started hearing about the warden. And I remember Mojang specifically saying that the warden was going to be able to kind of find you. It was sort of like an anti-cheese boss because you weren't just going to be able to like tower up or hide behind walls. But that always made no sense to me because the warden is blind. So it doesn't make intuitive sense in my mind as to how the warden should be able to detect you when you are behind these things and know that you're behind these things, right? Like in a game, sure, it makes sense. You can make up whatever logic for that. But intuitively, it doesn't make sense. What does make sense, though? Well, what they're trying to do is be able to deter you from trying to just wake the warden and get out of there, right? Or at the very least, be able to try to defeat the warden without the warden being able to attack you instead. So what I'd like to see is a second mob. Let's go ahead and talk about that. This is what I call the Zealot. The Zealot is a mob that is exclusively found in ancient cities, and it is exclusively found in non-pacified ancient cities, meaning that you can't have gone through and destroyed all the skulk stuff, right? The reason for this is because these are neutral mobs. They're not hostile towards the player, at least not immediately. And in fact, you can trade with them. This is where things actually become interesting, because the idea, here's the thing. I look at ancient cities as sort of in-game content. You can go there at any time, sure, but they're much easier at the end of the game. And what else have you done by the end of the game? Probably collected a lot of enchantments. I know, speaking from myself, as many end cities as I've raided, as many, things that I've fished out of the water. I have chests full, oftentimes in my worlds, of enchanted items. But what am I going to do with them? I've got nothing. I could toss them. I could get a little bit of XP for them. But if I'm getting the XP from them, it probably means that I already have the enchantments on me. So what do I need the XP for? It's a little bit of a catch-22 here. And so what I proposed instead, what if I could trade them? What if we can use them as a sort of currency? And this is how I would do it. You go to these ancient cities, you find the zealots there, and you are actually able to open up a UI with them. That UI offers you one slot. You put the item in the slot. The zealot analyzes it for maybe a handful of seconds, just so you can't speed through it. And then they offer you 3 items in exchange. This is a loot table that they have that is essentially a by chance loot table that depends on the item you offer. So if, for example, I offer Curse of Vanishing, almost broken leather boots, I'm not going to have a very high chance of getting anything very good or exciting from these trades. I'll still get something, sure, but not much. However, if I offer, fully enchanted netherite, full durability chest plate or something, I have a much higher chance of getting really good trades, exclusive stuff, or even the option of getting higher enchantments than you're able to get anywhere else in the game. The idea being, maybe I get a sharpness 6 sword, or maybe I get a whatever, right? Or a book, rather. A book would actually make a lot more sense, because it would allow you to then put it on whatever you want. I think this is a really cool idea, and it gets even better. Because here's the thing. This is a type of illager, right? But it is neutral to the player at first. However, if you were to, say, attack them, they become hostile. When they become hostile, what do? Well, not a whole lot on their own. They're not a melee type creature, but they do have an attack, a soulfire charge. They'll shoot that at you if you're within a certain distance, and they're always going to try to detect where the player is. If the player is closer, they might summon a witch instead. And witches are really interesting because they essentially act as audible breadcrumbs for the warden, because the witch is going to follow you and constantly throw splash potions. Splash potions make a noise when they splash. The warden can detect that, can pick up on that, and will now know roughly where you're heading, roughly what direction you're going. That's terrifying. Or, even worse, it could wake the warden that you've so far prevented, right? But even better than this, the zealot will also detect where the player is, and if it can pathfind to it. If it detects that it cannot pathfind to the player, then it might summon vexes. So if you've towered up into the air, vexes will come after you, and they can knock you off these towers very easily, which can deal a lot of fall damage. Plus, the vexes deal a decent amount of damage on their own. If you bury yourself in the ground, make a little hole for yourself, the vexes can come after you there as well. If you put yourself behind a wall, etc. You get the point, right? This is where things get terrifying. Now, zealots don't aggro all zealots around you. When you make one aggressive, they're not going to just automatically turn every zealot against you. That's a little too overpowered. Though maybe, zealots within a certain range might become aggressive towards you, whatever the case. The idea is that the one that you attack will never unhostile towards you, at least not if you're not peaceful mode, of course. However, the ones that are aggravated by proxy, the ones you didn't attack, those ones will eventually become non-hostile again, will become neutral again. Now, to prevent you from taking these mobs out of the ancient cities, if they leave the ancient cities, it starts a little countdown timer that essentially will dissolve the effect on them. They're no longer going to be zealots. Essentially, either they will just dissolve out of existence entirely, or they will transform into probably invokers, because that's probably the closest thing that they can be related to, right? They summon vexes. Or the other idea is that if you pacify the entire ancient city, if you get rid of all of the skulk sensors, the skulk, what do they call it? Shriekers, all that stuff, right? In that case, they will also begin to pacify as well. So you kind of always have to leave yourself at a little bit of a risk in order to interact with these guys. And I really, really love this idea. Worse still, because I'm not done. If you have traded the zealots, they can now equip the items you have traded with them. Again, they're not melee, so they're not going to equip swords or pickaxes or shovels or anything, but armor they will. And they can give those items to witches for witches to equip as well. I just think that's a really interesting idea, and it gives, obviously, the witches a little bit more incentive to be a little more illager-like, since, obviously, they are summoned in with raids. And after all, they kind of are an honorary illager at the end of the day. Let me know your thoughts on this update, on this idea in general, down in the comments below. And of course, if you want to take this conversation further, we can do so over on the Discord channel. It's not technically a Minecraft Discord, but I do have a channel over there for gaming. So we'll carry over the conversation in the gaming channel or in the general channel as well. You can also check out the comments below if I didn't say that already. Let me know your thoughts on this. What would you change? What would you implement? Or how would you change these interactions? Or do you think they're just dumb ideas? Because I'd like to hear that one too. And of course, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And you can also check out my Instagram and Patreon if you want to help support the channel, get perks. And expect that wish list video to come soon. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.